I want to welcome Kirian Deso von Hest back to the show. He makes bold predictions. Unfortunately, a lot of them are coming true. He talked about gold when it was way cheaper than it is now. He talked about hyperinflation before fast food prices doubled in a span of a few years, right? So let's see what Kirian Deso von Hest wants to say now. Welcome, Kirian.
It's always great to be back here. I was the first guest, and I hope to come on many more times after this.
You've called for hyperinflation, and why that's such a huge deal now is because it's really starting to be felt. Like in 2020 to now, I think fast food prices have doubled. I don't know what monthly rate that is, but that is very serious. Like serious.
Yeah,
It's the biggest problem, right? Like what phase of hyperinflation are we in? Because it feels psychologically like people are starting to get it. Companies are starting to get it.
we're in phase two. This phase, exactly as you describe it, phase two is this phase wherein hyperinflation switches from the fundamental driver to a psychological driver. So there's two parts to hyperinflation: fundamental, psychological. The fundamental driver will always be there. That's why I call it fundamental, and it's been in play since September 2019. They have to keep adding liquidity to the system, or it goes down a black hole, which they cannot survive. So whatever that happens, even like March 2023, when SVB failed, they bailed out every uninsured depositor.
Right.
And then they bluffed and said that they wouldn't do it for the entire nation. Oh, believe you me, they would.
Right.
Well, they might let some of the peasants die. But the big guys, the banks, the people with too much liquidity, they will be saved because that liquidity needs to be in their account or everybody dies.
Right. Yeah.
The system is that fragile.
Yeah.
So that fundamental driver is there. And now the interest on the national debt has joined it as a fundamental driver. But that interest was never going to go up if rates didn't go up. And the rates have to go up because the US is broke and they have to keep printing money and the market realizes it. What's going to happen next? It's very easy. It's incredibly easy to predict. The current situation will continue until the bond market says enough is enough. We're not going to lend you at these rates. You've seen the yields trending up, right? Well, that's the market not being entirely sure if the US gets the message or not.
Right.
But please get it.
Right.
So at some point, that deficit is literally just going to explode the long-term rates, and that's when they have to yield curve control. But that's also the time when the US government, for the first time in, I think, a very long time, maybe the first time in its history, will be forced to spend less. That is something that hasn't happened yet. The only way they've spent less is with the Inflation Reduction Act, where they promised to not spend 300 billion they promised to spend in the future. So they unpromised something. It's not that they cut spending, they unpromised something,
Yeah.
and promptly passed another stimulus act which spent 300 billion. I forgot which one it was, but I remember it happened.
Right. Yeah.
So the US government hasn't had a need to reduce spending at all. That's why in peacetime, with full employment, they're running a $1.6 trillion deficit. Mm. When the yields go up, the US government has no option but to roll over its debt at the current high rates because they can't pay it back, so they have to roll over it, which means that the interest on the national debt gets materially worse. It's a death spiral. It's a doom loop. So since they're spending so much, the first phase will seem like a solution. They will cut at least $500 billion off of 1.6 trillion. And it will look like a small recession. And they're going to say, well, it's for the good of the nation. We have to, the bond market, yada, yada, yada. People will accept it. They're still patriotic. And despite everything that's happened, if this is what it takes to fix the situation, they're willing to go along with it. But what people don't understand is that the first $500 billion off of 1.6 trillion is very easy to cut. The second half is very, very hard to cut. Well, the next $500 billion. And the last $500 billion is impossible to cut.
Yeah.
Because once you've cut that $500 billion and you're running a $1.1 trillion deficit and you're already having a recession, people are suffering. And now you need to tell them, okay, what we need to do now is cut $500 billion and give you guys a depression. And after you've been in the middle of that depression, we need to make it worse.
Yeah.
Nobody gets elected that way.
No.
No one. You know how they get elected? In the current bad situation, they're going to say, we're going to give you more money.
Right.
And Biden has done nothing but cancel student debt, even when the Supreme Court told him he couldn't. He's still been doing it against the fucking Supreme Court. Why is he getting away with it? Because people want him to get away with it. Because they want to get rid of their student debt. So when situations get worse, what are people going to demand? They're going to demand price controls. They're going to demand rent controls. They're going to demand gas price controls, especially in the US. So what's the US going to do? The US government is going to introduce food subsidies. Not food stamps. No. Generalized food subsidies on the price of goods in stores. Same with gasoline. That's probably one of the first ones they'll hit. People are going to complain about the taxes they're increasing on gases and such, which they need to do because the government is looking for tax revenue wherever they can find it. Because the only other way to run the government budget without lending is tax revenue. That's why your property taxes have been going up. That's why your gas taxes have been going up. That's why every single tax you pay has been going up, whether you like it or not, is because the government needs the revenue, because they needs to not lend as much. It's not even about paying it back. It's about not lending quite as much as they're already doing. Yeah. Yes, it's all a scam. Yes, it is. But even if you say, well, I'm not going to pay any taxes, that still makes you liable for the debt. If you're going to say, well, let's just declare bankruptcy, you can do that, but then everybody who holds a treasury loses money. There's $34.5 trillion debt out there. Foreign bondholders hold about 7.5, I think, trillion. You can do the math. About $24 trillion is held by Americans. Your pension. So the US declares bankrupt. If you're willing to give up your pension, okay, we can do it.
Right.
But you will also no longer receive Social Security, no more Medicaid, Medicare, no more government transfer payments, no more veteran care. Government and police, fire departments, ambulances, all that will be severely curtailed, if not disappear. You will have to run on tax revenue alone. And because so much of your GDP is government transfer payments, your GDP is going to shrink a lot, which is going to shrink tax revenue, which is going to shrink how much services you can still afford. And because you just went bankrupt, not a soul in the world is going to lend you more money.
Right. So it seems
and
like
that is what the fundamental driver of hyperinflation is. And the reason why we're now in phase 2, which is where it switches from fundamental to psychological, is because more and more people get it. This is not the first time I've been saying these things.
Right.
But by now, as you said, there are now real world references that people see that makes them think more that I might be right. That's where we're at now.
Exactly.
It's going to get much worse.
Right. So they're going to try to choose austerity. They're going to try to raise taxes. But at the end of the day, that's not going to be enough. So they're going to essentially
reverse course, print money.
Is that phase 3?
Yes. Now, phase 3 is where the curve goes exponential because it becomes fully psychological. There will always be people that will lie until the end, or will stick with the current system until the very end, the bitter end, simply because, one, they've been brainwashed and they can't help themselves. 2, the alternative is too horrible to contemplate, so they shut down. It's tragic, but it happens. And it happens to a lot of people, more people than you would think. COVID was a very good example of this, what happened during the pandemic. Expect that, but worse, because this is not something that's going to go away with a vaccine or any kind of thing we can do. This is something that is our actions coming back to haunt us in the past. Yeah. There's nothing you can do. It's just, you have to go through it. So when everyone gets it, that's when the curve goes exponential, not because people just don't think it has any value anymore and it's magical. No, people just don't want to have it anymore. They get money because they have a job, they have an income, they had this before, they will have it still. Not everybody gets fired or such, and there will be plenty of money. That's the difference between an inflationary recession and the normal deflationary recessions we've had over in our lifetimes, is because in inflationary recessions, the problem isn't too little money, there's too much money.
Yeah.
And because too much money, costs are going up. And because your wage is not keeping pace with the cost going up, you have to redirect where you spend your money. You know, your mortgage is twice as expensive, then you have to spend twice as much money on the mortgage. Well, you can no longer have that vacation in the summer, meaning airline tickets drop like a brick because people no longer go on vacations. You can't afford it.
So then the question is, you're saying inflationary recession / depression would be like phase 3. Now, two things. It seems like the whole austerity. What are these balloons?
Birthdays? It's not mine.
Okay, no, it seems the austerity tax song and dance might cause a massive drawdown in the stock market, because in Venezuela, the stock market never went down. But in an inflationary recession, the stock market will probably never go down nominally, right?
It does go down,
Nominally.
but it goes back up. So over a long period, like if you look at the Venezuelan stock market, you don't see it anymore because the end number is so high and everything at the bottom has been compressed down to nothing.
Right.
But the fun part is you can go look at the Venezuelan stock market or the bond rates, same thing. I have. And the fun thing is if you limit your view to like a 3-month view, and then you start at the end of the curve when it really goes high, and then you slide your view back. So your time frame doesn't change, but you go back in time. You will see that exponential curve in every single time frame you go to. And you can go as far back as 2003 before you see this. Before you see a 3-month period where the price ended up lower than before.
Yeah. Right.
That is what true hyperinflation looks like. The curve just keeps going exponential no matter how far you look. Like October 2022, that bottom, that might be the most important bottom in US history because that's as far as they were willing to go at the time. But those corrections you will get. So like I said earlier, when the government cuts that first $500 billion off of their budget, it's going to be a small recession, which can make the market drop. But the NASDAQ will never drop down to like 3 or 2K where it needs to be.
Got it. That's brilliant.
Yeah. So in that period, when it starts dropping from, say, 17K to, let's say it makes it all the way back to 10K. For us, because we're living through it, it seems like hell and chaos on earth. And Wall Street will constantly be screaming bloody murder, and banks are falling over left and right. But that's not nearly as bad as it needs to get. And before we get at that point, the Fed is going to say, you know what, this is enough. This is enough. We've given ourselves some breathing room. Let's just pull back a bit. But that's what I mean. The US government is going to go from $1.6 trillion deficit to $1 trillion deficit to $1.3 trillion deficit. Yeah. Because they already hit that wall. And they say, we have to back off a bit. We have to back off a bit. This is a process. We'll get there. But the moment they try to push that 1.3 down to 1 trillion again, they're going to meet that resistance of why are they're keeping it this high in the first place. You know, people have already suffered. They push it down. Things immediately start collapsing again, and they back off. They push it down, and they back off. And then they back off, and then this thing starts rising again. And then 3 years, could be 3 years down the road, you're looking at a $1.6 trillion deficit again. Your GDP is now much higher than it was before, and everybody's suffering much worse than they did before.
Yeah.
And then it starts to dawn on people, oh shit, it's not just that the budget is too high, we can't cut it. And that's when you get into phase 3, which is fully psychological, where you still have the same fundamental driver. It's fundamental. It'll never go away until the system resets. But people realize it. They start thinking about it. And they all start doing the exact same thing at the exact same time, which is, I don't want to hold this money anymore.
Right.
I'm going to buy gold. What do you mean gold is no longer for sale? What do you mean the billionaires are paying top dollar at the factory gate? All right, I'll buy silver. Where's the silver gone? Oh, shit. Platinum. Gone. Palladium, gone. Fuck. What are house prices doing? Well, they're not keeping up with inflation because people are going bankrupt. I got to put the money somewhere. I'll just buy a house. I'll just buy a house. I'll lose 20% of my value, but 20% is better than 80%. I got to do something. That's where people are going to end up. That is why the curve goes exponential, because each individual No matter what I say or do, you don't have to listen to me. We're going to get here anyway.
Yeah,
Each
exactly.
individual has only one optimum route of survival left: ditch the money, buy assets. And that is why the curve goes exponential. That is why I've been saying to people, buy gold and silver, because the reason why gold and silver outrun inflation is because more and more people realize what I've been talking about. It's not that the gold and silver increases in value, it cannot increase in value. That's the whole point of gold. It holds its value. You don't lose molecules if you put it in a vault because it doesn't rust, it doesn't corrode, it doesn't change. So you put it in a vault, you pull it out 1,000 years later, it's exactly the same. We're pulling gold bars from the Roman era out of the ground shiny. Gold is non-reactive, and it has a certain level of rarity. That's why it was history throughout money throughout history. It is also the case that we pull it out of the ground, yes, so there's more of it, but the mining methods we use to pull it out of the ground are also the same as we use for iron, aluminium, titanium, any other metal we pull out of the ground. So it scales with the amount of value we add to society by adding new resources into it. That's why it was perfect for so long. And that's why we might return to it in future. But the semiconductor revolution has introduced so much actual value that I think gold has become a bit too scarce to be the people's money. And I also think that silver has undergone the same problem. So I think in the future, it could very well be possible that gold becomes the super elite class of money. Silver becomes what currently would be the billionaire class money and millionaire class money. And then copper becomes the people's money again.
Right. So that is your asset of choice in the coming storm. It is physical precious metals and copper, essentially, right? Physical metals that you can actually buy.
Yeah.
Perfect. I think that makes sense. But the US currency has debased 100% over the last 100 years, essentially. It's going to continue doing that. The periods of massive debasement are painful. What about after that? Is there a boom time like the 1950s or no?
Well, the boom time we don't have to talk about, not because I don't want to be a drag or don't want to be optimistic, but we're faced with many, 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 many problems going forwards.
Oh,
And if we keep whacking them like a whack-a-mole game, we can make the downfall maybe less painful than it would otherwise be if we just give up on all hope. There will be a time where everything has devalued as far as it'll need to go. There
yeah.
will be a time where people have abandoned the US debt entirely and the system just resets. But at that point, nobody's going to want to invest. Take Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is now introducing a gold-backed currency. Are you going to invest in Zimbabwe?
Good point. Good point. What about the British pound, though, which has a huge history of just debasement?
The British are going to suffer the same. The euro is going to die too. But not every country in Europe is going to suffer the same fate. This is why I keep saying that the economic problems between the US and Europe are different, because Europe is not a union. No matter how much the dictators want it to be, they can't make it as such. There's too much history of animosity between nations. And if you look at the European Union as individual nations, then the Netherlands' finances are much more sound and financially secure than the Italian finances. So if we cut the euro and go back to the EEG or the EEC, the European Economic Community, when we all still had our own currencies, we might be able to dodge a bullet here. We'll get a recession, maybe even depression, but that's different from total collapse. It'll bring prices down. It'll be good for the people in the end, but maybe not for our generation, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. So you see insane debasement, faith lost in the current system. And there's a chance, though, the British pound will survive because it's been able to forever. That's all I'm saying.
No, because Britain has fucked up too much. Because they have lived through all of this for so long, they basically think they're invulnerable now, or at least the political class does. But they suffer the same problems as the other European and American political classes. The Tories are wholly incompetent, and Labour isn't any better.
Right.
So what's going to happen to Britain? Well, they're just going to fucking hyperinflate like a third world country. That's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
We already saw that with Liz Truss.
Yeah, and you think on any other period in their history, this is the time where the faith is broken in the system because it's been around forever.
Well, I don't want to compare this to the entirety of English history because they've got such a long history. I mean, compared to England, America's just a baby. You know, England has had probably hyperinflations before. I'm not that up to date on when they've had them.
Right.
They've had bubbles before. So it's in the entire history, it's not uncommon, but it's just not going to be a good time in their history going forward.
Got it. I see what you're saying. Yeah, I'm looking at like well, they've had inflation periods before. We'll just get through it. But I see what you're saying. It's a big, huge problem this time.
Oh,
So
it'd be a hyperinflationary period, but every hyperinflation basically plays out the same way. The country needs to go bankrupt. It can't go bankrupt, so it needs the people who hold the debt to just throw it away.
yeah,
I do suspect that the current system of money as debt is prolonging hyperinflation longer than it need to be, simply because you solve hyperinflation by printing more money, but the only way you can print money is to create more debt, and you cannot solve more debt with more debt.
right.
Not even in hyperinflation. Zimbabwe got the right idea because now they're converting to a gold-backed currency again. That is a system change. That is different. Then the debt can be thrown away as worthless at some point, as long as the debt doesn't convert into the new currency. And Zimbabwe, I don't think anybody still holds Zimbabwe debt. It would be absolutely insane. Maybe, you know, in a dusty laptop somewhere. Yeah. But that's the difference with Argentina, and that's why I think Argentina is going to fail, is because Malay chickened out. He should have killed the central bank, and he didn't. The reason why it's never worked in history before and people don't trust it is because every time in history, governments ran out of money based on gold, so they switched to fiat to devalue the population. Because it becomes real easy as a government to say, just run a little bit of a deficit. Not just a little bit of a deficit. Just a tiny one.
Right,
This will be okay. We'll run the surplus next year. We'll run the surplus next year. Just a tiny one. Very tiny. No, it never ends up that way. So that's why we need gold, because at some point the government can't attract any more gold, and that's when people are going to say, you can't attract any more gold, and the government says it's fine, and then the market says no.
Right.
It's a fundamental thing we can check. Except that the US hasn't audited its gold in a very long time, and there's problems with the gold audits. So we're not even sure the US still has 8,000 tons. That's the last thing I'll add, by the way. It's that that's where the number comes from about how bad it is. If you back the current amount of currency with the amount of gold that's at the Federal Reserve and the US has on the books, like the 8,000 tons you hear about, then gold needs to be about, I would reckon, $200,000 per ounce for the whole system to make sense. Wow. The reason for that is pretty simple. The current gold stock at the current gold price that's the heightened price, current life price, is about 700 billion. And you have a debt of 35 trillion, let's say. It'll be there soon enough. You can't pay back 35 trillion with 700 billion. If the US were to switch to a gold standard today, it would basically export all its gold away, paying the interest on the national debt. You cannot let this happen because you're just going to end up with zero gold and switching to fiat anyway. So if you need to pay the debt back, but you have to do it in gold, but you want to keep some of that gold, just revalue the gold. At 2,300 per ounce, the US government's hoard is 700 billion. So if we add a zero to it, and it's $23,000 an ounce, the US's gold hoard, instead of 700 billion, will be 7 trillion. 7 trillion is substantially less than 35 trillion. So we just add another zero. You end up with 230K per ounce, and 7 trillion becomes 70 trillion. You pay back half the 35 trillion, so you export half your gold away. You pay off your national debt. You don't have an interest on the national debt anymore. Your government budget can recover. Because one of your largest expenses went away. So instead of running a $1.6 trillion deficit and paying $1 trillion in interest expense, you run a $500 billion deficit and you pay nothing in interest expense. And then you just cut that last $500 billion, which is the easy part at that point. And then you run a stable budget. Then you don't export any gold because you import gold as fast as you export it. and then the level stays stable. But that necessarily means that gold needs to be at $230,000 per ounce. And because gold is the standard for a measurement of value, every other price is going to follow gold along.
Yeah.
And that is how the currency devalues. That is how they devalue the debt. That is how they get rid of the debt problem. And whatever we do, no matter what I say, no matter what you believe, it does not matter. The entire system will be jank until it's fallen down, until it's to 230,000 per ounce of gold. Because that's when it's fixed down. That's when you can throw the debt away, because it can be repaid for next to nothing. But it also devalues everyone else and everyone else's pension and such. But you've already lost that money. That's why hyperinflation is fundamental. You spent it, but you never had it, and now the bills come and due. That's why I say buy gold. Because I know this must happen. I just don't know when the exact steps are or what the decisions are going to lead to the next trigger. Like I said, the next one is easy to predict. At some point, they're going to cut the government budget. It's going to end up horribly, and they're going to spend more as a result. So the value of the dollar is going to go up while they cut because people expect better. And then they realize it doesn't work. And that's when the value drops further than it was before. That's when you get a small peak, and then that's the period where a lot of people are going to sell their gold, buy dollar, because they expect things are fixed, because the government will just cut the budget.
Yeah, exactly.
And those are the people who get screwed when they realize the government can't do shit. Right, because this is fundamental. This is math.
That's the head fake when they start to talk about austerity. Yeah. So brilliant. That is amazing. Thank you so much for that. Very interesting. Jeez. Okay. So with that, you are building technology. What do you want to share about it?
Well, let's just first say that there's many ways to get through hyperinflation, not just gold. But like I said, you don't have gold, you go to silver. You don't have silver, go to platinum. You don't have platinum, you just go find something else. So as long as you've got an asset that holds value and increases in value because other people will demand it, where previously there was no demand, you become richer, no matter what the currency does. And what I've invented is a space engine. I've talked about this before, but now I've presented the full technology review. You've watched the video yourself. Anybody viewing can find it on the Kirian Technologies channel, and I'm sure you'll add it to the description and everything. You can also find it on the website, Kirian.tech, KIRIAN.TACH. That's the simple one, and I'll just link to the full website. It has a how it works page where you can find all the irrelevant information. You can find the video there. You can find the documents I've made there with the full explanation of how it works. You can find the math document there, which my partner in crime, Thomas Fontaine, has calculated. So he already serves as the independent verification of my work, but he has monetary interest, which people might not trust. So the work is all out there to be verified. We're working on a cleaner version of the math document right now. And once that is released, we're just going to send a mail off to NASA and let them know what we have. We haven't exactly been advertising this yet because honestly, it's taken me quite a bit of time to get used to basically what I've done. And what I've done is created intergalactic space travel. It takes some getting used to. Well, I could just talk about how it works.
Yeah.
In highly compressed format. Again, please, if you want to argue with how it works, go to the website, read my materials. You'll see I have thought about a lot of things. But basically, I'm using the recoil of a coil gun in order to create a linear motion from using only electricity as fuel and only exhausting energy and no mass. So I don't ionize a gas and exhaust it like ion engines. I don't use a petrochemical fuel. All the mass is contained within the device itself and stays there. What creates motion then, it's not a perpetual motion machine at all. It uses electricity as fuel because we can use electricity to generate work. It was just about figuring out the pattern of creating linear motion with it, and that's what I claim to have done. If you want the closest analog, the easiest way to think of it as a reaction wheel that creates linear motion. So for those who don't know what it is, a reaction wheel is a weighted wheel in a spacecraft which if you spin that weight up, action and reaction says that whatever you use to spin the weight up must also rotate in the opposite direction. So if you build a heavy wheel inside of a spacecraft and you start spinning it, then the spacecraft around it starts rotating in the opposite direction. And if you then slow it down, whatever you use to slow it down also slows down because they're spinning in opposite directions. Well, they stop. And that's how satellites and even the James Webb Telescope, I think, use reaction wheels for minute adjustments in angle, because it only allows you to rotate because it creates angular momentum. But you're using an electromotor to spin up a wheel and then slow it down again. So I don't see why you can't translate that into linear motion, and which is what that is something I've done now by using a magnetic projectile and using a coil gun, just a series of electromagnetic coils, in order to attract a magnet. Now, as you know, if you attract a mass, whatever's attracting that mass must be moved with it, because in space, and it is a space engine, there's nothing to hold on to. So if you fire a gun in space, the recoil is going to make the gun go the other way, and that's basically how every rocket works. But then you eject the bullet. Now, what if you could just make the bullet go around the corner? How would you do that? You make a tube. Question is, does that tube get pushed back by the projectile in the corner when it travels through that? We've done the math. Math says yes, but not fully. So if you have a tube that's accelerated to 1 meters per second in this direction, and then the ball rolls down the tube, it has to be accelerated in the opposite direction by -1 meter per second, because in the second corner, you slow the ball down. So if the ball's turned around and it's now going in that direction, you use the tube to catch the ball. Now, the genius of it is, it's two parts, is that you would say, well, the ball has to slow the tube down because you use the ball to speed the tube up. So then the tube has to slow the ball down, and the ball has to slow the tube down. But that's not what happens. When you accelerate the ball, you shoot it away. It's like throwing a baseball. And you know that if you throw a baseball, the weight of the baseball is pushing you back. That's the force you're injecting to, overcome that. That's how you impart speed on the ball. But if you catch a really fast ball, you get also pushed back. You throw it away, you get pushed back. You catch it, you get pushed back. And that's what happens in the tube. You shoot it away and use the recoil as travel direction. You have to spend some of that energy redirecting the ball, but that's okay because it's not all of the energy. It would compensate completely if it was a straight pipe. It goes like this here, and then here it meets the end, goes like this, stops again. It's not a straight pipe. The ball effectively has nothing in front of it except a little bit of a corner, because this is what the ball sees. And as it goes through the corner, its perspective doesn't change. So the only way in which it interacts with the tube is via this wall, because it's rolling around the wall like that. So if the ball has made it a quarter down the tube and you cut the tube there, the ball would go forward forever because of inertia. There's nothing to change its direction anymore. So if it's halfway down the tube, it also can't exert backward force anymore because it's now traveling in that direction, going in that one. So in the end, it's simple. It's as simple as throwing a ball in a tube that's attached to you and then catching it again, and then being able to put it back into the tube. And the beauty of it is that both corners compensate for each other because it's a oval loop. So it's a half a corner circle, straight part, half a corner circle, straight part. If the ball is rolling down the corner here fast and it's doing it here slow, it doesn't really matter because the length of the circle doesn't change. The travel path of the ball doesn't change. And if the ball has to travel 3 meters and it's traveling at 10 meters per second, it's only going to have like a third of a second to do it. After a third of a second, it can no longer exert force. It's simply a requirement of the law of conservation of energy here that the energy has to go somewhere, and where it's going is into linear motion. And for us, it's simply a matter of that is the conversion that we want. So we stop converting there and just enjoy the ride. Now, the second part that I do want to mention, that is actually a very smart part of this engine, is that the projectile itself is not ferromagnetic, it's a permanently magnetic ball. Can be neodymium, but what we found in testing is that weaker magnetic fields at higher speeds are actually preferential, because otherwise the ball stops very fast. But if you drop an electromagnetic ball through a copper tube, it slows down. This is an effect that's well known, and you see a lot of YouTube videos about it. You drop it against the force of gravity, and it drops very slowly and then just exits the bottom of the tube. The reason for that is when you move a magnetic field through copper, a magnetic counterfield is created of the opposite polarity. We call these eddy currents because you're rotating the electrons in the material in the opposite direction of the magnetic field's polarity. And because rotating electrons is an electrical current, which is moving electrons, which generates an electromagnetic field, the copper creates its own counterfield to whatever magnet you put into it in whatever orientation it has. Because the magnet rotates, the magnetic field also just rotates in the copper at the same speed. We generate electricity this way. All electricity is generated this way by forming the copper material into a wire. Then the eddy currents can only go in one or of two directions. And if we drag a magnet over that wire like that, well, the electrons are going in that direction. So you get DC current in that direction. Simple as that.
Cool. Well, anything else you want to share about what you're doing?
All I can say right now is that Tomas is almost finished with his previous company, so he should be working full-time with me on our projects pretty soon. As soon as the math document is ready that we're going to send to NASA, it's going to be the same as the one we already have out there. So again, Kirian.tech or KirianTechnologies.com. You go to them, how it works, as long as you can read handwriting, you can read the math document. It's all there. But we're just going to clean it up. And since we're working on cleaning it up, we might as well wait on sending this tech to NASA a little bit longer, because they'll appreciate actually being able to read it easily. But we have, traditional math at 48 pages of it scanned in, done with paper in hand, just like very old school ways. You can't get more classical than that.
Right.
So, once that's available, I'll post it on Twitter. That's available at Kirian Tech on Twitter. It's not very active because we don't have a lot of news right now. But the more we're working on a company, the more people we'll employ in the future, the more contact we have, the more active we'll become. And it's only one independent verification away. I can build a prototype, and then people are going to say, that's very nice. Let's see somebody else verify it. Can we just skip that step, and can we have just if somebody else built this thing? I've on the website, this is the last important thing. On Kirian.tech, one of the documents I give out is a quick guide. It will tell you first how the theory behind it is, quickly. It will tell you what all the parts are for on the figures. The figures you can find on the PCT application website. A link is also provided on our website. So the whole patent application is public now. You can look for it yourself. You don't have to. Again, link is on our website. And at the bottom of the quick guide is a quick guide to a quick guide. It's a quick and dirty prototype using PVC tubing, copper tubing, neodymium magnetic ball, and a bit of copper wiring, and an Arduino for any kind of firing control mechanism.
Right. Well, appreciate the ambition, the innovation. That's what moves society forward. So, thank you.
I've been coming on this channel for years trying to prove I see patterns where others don't. I think I managed to build up a little bit of cred here. So why not do the same with physics?
The ESG people, none of that worked out for them. I mean, none of the modern monetary theorists have been proven right. None of the hydrogen people have been proven right. I mean, but the hyperinflationary hard gold people have so far. So, yeah. Nice.
if there's one thing, the AI bubble will collapse. We all know it's a bubble. Nvidia isn't worth more than the entire stock market of Germany. We know it's a bubble.
Important thing to bring up, yeah.
Yeah, so eventually that will all collapse. When it will collapse, they're going to spend more money, and that is, I think, the trigger, which is going to force the government to spend less. Because if the government has to spend even more than they're doing now, the bond market is going to object, rates are going to go up, and that's going to scare everyone into, the next phase of all this.
Right.
But eventually they will print more money. And the next bubble we're getting, we had the biotech bubble, it collapsed. Then they blew the AI bubble to stop the real estate bubble from collapsing. So when the AI bubble goes and that real estate bubble is looking mighty shaky, like every sale of commercial real estate is for like an 80% loss, if there's a sale at all. And the banks are still sitting on $500 billion of unrealized losses. That isn't going to go away either. They're going to blow another bubble to, stop the big one from going in the next phase of liquidity. I'm hoping it's space because I get to benefit from the next one and then the liquidity flows to me.
Right.
But it looks like a good candidate for me because I'm sort of in the sector now. And from a lot of stuff I've seen pass by on Twitter and news messages here and there for early stage investors, it's interesting.
Appreciate the insights, the innovation, the ambition. Keep us posted. Where can people, I think you told us where people can go to find your companies,
Yeah.
right? I'll link it below as well. But anything else you want to close with?
No, just thank you for having me. I hope everybody out there, gets through the coming dark times okay. I'll continue to post on Twitter and beat everybody's head in with the current situation until everybody gets it. But the moment everybody gets it, that's when the curve goes exponential. Nobody ever thinks of the solution as being the apocalypse, but I'm afraid it is.